29 million Indians died of starvation in British-induced famines because Winston Churchill deliberately proceeded to divert essential supplies from civilians in Bengal as reserve stockpiles. And when conscience-stricken British officials wrote to him, pointing out that people were dying because of this decision, he peevishly wrote in the margins of the file, "Why hasn't Gandhi died yet?"
When India took its first steps into interplanetary space mission, Western media and some individuals got all flustered, like a toddler with a missing toy, throwing shade about toilets and viability. But India didn't let that rain on their parade. Fast forward to Chandrayaan 3, and British politician Paul Golding just couldn't resist a snarky pat on the back. He said, "Well done India, on the success of your space program. And shame on UK politicians, who keep unnecessarily giving India tens of millions of pounds in foreign aid. Thank you for your heartfelt applause for India's space achievements. We do understand, it must be tough to see India soar high in the cosmos, while you're still figuring out the rocket manual. As for the foreign aid, we truly appreciate the pocket change you've kindly returned, after those 200+ years of colonial discount shopping. Keep cheering, and who knows, maybe someday, you'll join India in the space, with your very own, made-in-UK rocket." The esteemed politician's cryptic tweet, skillfully reminding India of the millions of pounds of UK aid. But no worries Mr. Golding, we'll remember your tweet, as a reminder of how history can be ironic. For starters, how much money was really taken out of India? Recent study, by Economist Utsa Patnaik, which was published by Columbia University Press, shows that, between 1765 and 1938, Britain took almost $45 trillion out of India. The British Raj, and the East India Company, set up a trade system that led to this loss of wealth. The East India Company gathered taxes in India, and used some of the money to buy goods from India for the British. This was like getting the goods for free. Also, stolen goods were re-exported and sold for more money, which made Britain even richer. When the British Raj took over, they set up a way for Indian money to be sent to London using special paper bills called council bills. The money from India's exports ended up in London, leaving India with a deficit despite running a trade surplus. This economic drain deprived India of significant resources that could have been invested in its own development. Instead, the wealth was used to fuel imperialism and industrialization in Britain and other parts of the Western world. And people wonder why India isn't as advanced as China or Japan. India's economy didn't grow much when the British were in charge, and many people died from famines caused by British policies. The famous one is the Churchill's Bengal famine that is estimated to have killed up to 3 million people, which was not caused by drought. A study by Indian and American researchers reveals that the 1943 Bengali famine resulted from Winston Churchill's policies as they analyzed weather data from 6 major Indian famines. Moreover, if additional evidence is required, how about we consider the fact that the UK operates the biggest thieves market in the country? We all know the story of Colonial, the world's largest cut diamond that belongs to India. However, the Colonial diamond is still set in the crown of Queen Elizabeth, which is on show at the Tower of London. But if you thought that was the only valuable thing the British stole from India, you were wrong. There are a lot of valuable things, idols, and items from India that are in the biggest museums in Britain. They call it the British Museum. In India, it's called the Chor Bazaar. They shamelessly show off the stolen idols from the colonies, and while there is an Imperial War Museum, there isn't a museum of imperialism. People such as Paul Golding and British journalist Alistair Stewart frequently brag about UK aid to India, and Alistair Stewart even urged India to hang its head in shame and receive no further aid from the United Kingdom. These individuals place themselves on pedestals while preaching values to the world, but in actuality, they stoop under the weight of their self-imposed white man's burden. They believe the aid they provided to India has done wonders for its economy, and that India should therefore be eternally in their debt. To be precise, British aid to India accounts for less than 0.4% of India's GDP. In fact, the Indian government spends more on fertilizer subsidies. India has even gone so far as to inform Britain that they do not require their assistance. The then Finance Minister of India, Pranab Mukherjee, famously referred to Britain's aid to India as peanuts and attempted to end Britain's aid. The British government decided to end the aid to India in 2015. However, around £2.3 billion in UK aid went to India between 2016 and 2021. Some people may claim it's Great Britain's generosity, but that's far from the truth. Why send aid to a country that doesn't need it anymore? Instead, that taxpayers' money could go towards bettering the lives of its own people. India even has its own aid program for countries in need. India is not like Pakistan, which needs loans to stay alive, and will go bankrupt without them. In fact, Pakistan seems to be focusing on celebrating the IMF loan it got, while India is celebrating the launch of its Chandrayaan 3 mission. If you don't know where you've come from, you don't know where you're going. Today, the vast majority of students in the UK cannot remember learning anything important about the history of British colonial subjects when they were enrolled in school. The British curriculum gives a lot of attention to the violence of others, like in Nazi Germany or during the American Civil War. It also goes into great detail about a few events in medieval and pre-Victorian English history, like the Black Death, the Great Fire of London, and Henry VIII's rule. But you would not learn anything in a British school about how cruel British colonialism was. After all, why confront the uncomfortable truth about our own country's history when we can just sweep it under the rug and pretend it never happened?
I just can't, it doesn't compute, but we don't know this history. You know, I took history in British schools up to the age of 18, and I got a pretty good grade. And
You never learned a line of colonial history, did you?
Well, almost everything that you have just said, I learned from your book.
The students didn't know anything about the British Army's concentration camps during the Boer War, the Bengal famine of 1943, or the killings of Kenyans in the 1950s. Yet, the dominant, whitewashed story of British colonial history seems to be deeply ingrained in the British mind. A survey by the market research company YouGov found that 49% of Britons still think the British Empire was a force for good that made the lives of the countries it colonized better, while only 15% think it made their lives worse. No textbook has ever said that Winston Churchill, who is so highly regarded as a hero and an intelligent politician, openly supported using chemical attack on Iraqi civilians when they wanted independence from Britain. There is still a lot of support for revisionism and whitewashing of history in conservative places like Oxford and elsewhere. For example, an Oxford scholar defended Britain's colonial past by telling Brits, "Don't feel bad about our colonial past." A large part of the British political elite has also taken this view. When asked in 2013 to apologize for the 1919 Amritsar massacre, in which British troops killed hundreds of Indians, then British Prime Minister David Cameron said, "I don't think it's right to go back into history and look for things we should apologize for." The former British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, pleaded with his country to stop being embarrassed about Britain's history of slavery. The truth is, its legacy still hurts former colonies, where things like artificial borders, unequal distribution of resources, or running out of resources, have led to war, poverty, and underdevelopment. Actually, in order to safeguard their image, Western media try to keep hidden any negative or embarrassing information regarding their colonial history. Prejudice, lack of impartiality, and a persisting colonial mentality are all on full display in this piece of Western media propaganda aimed to support a certain debunked story. Watch this video clip.
A country in the North Atlantic the size of Alabama that somehow took over the world and ruled it with decency unmatched by any empire in human history. The British Empire was not perfect, but it was far more humane than any other, ever. It's gone now, barely even remembered. Queen Elizabeth II was the last living link to a truly great Britain.
News anchor Tucker Carlson is a known history major, so hearing these words come out of his lips is the last straw. According to him, the British Empire was not just decent, but it was unmatched by any other empire in human history. And why settle for being merely decent when you can be far more humane? I mean, who needs to acknowledge the countless atrocities and human rights abuses committed by the British Empire when you can just brush them under the rug and call them imperfections? It's truly a shame that such a glorious empire that was far more humane than any other is now barely remembered. But I suppose it's easier to forget about the darker parts of history when you have someone like Tucker spinning it in a positive light. This is the standard of historical education they receive. He is essentially telling viewers that if they are ever the victims of a burglary or armed robbery, they should be grateful to their assailant for the gifts of culture, churches, a lovely black eye, and a few missing teeth. It's clear that people like Tucker hasn't done their research, or maybe they've just chosen to ignore the truth. Either way, it's quite comical to see someone so confidently spout such absurdity. In fact, the core realities of imperial exploitation and pillage, savagery, and looting are no longer contested by many contemporary defenders of British colonial authority in India. As an alternative, they provide a rebuttal. The benefits they leave behind are substantial and long-lasting, like for example the rule of law, railways, English education, even tea and cricket. Apologists for the British Empire often cite the construction of the Indian railroads as proof that the colonial rule was beneficial to the subcontinent, despite the fact that several nations developed railways without being colonized. The truth is that East India Company first envisioned railroads for its own commercial, governmental, and military domination over the country, and to carry extracted materials such as coal, iron ore, cotton, etc. By investing in the railroads, British stockholders gained obscene sums of money, since the government promised returns twice as high as government equities, with the difference being covered by Indian taxes rather than British ones. The British made out like bandits, while the Indian people footed the bill. As Dr. Shashi Tharoor rightly points out, Indians literally paid for their own oppression. The purpose of this video is not to target all British people, but rather a specific fraction among them. It aims to address those who hold the British Empire in high regard, and portray it as a righteous and benevolent entity, ignoring the brutalities it committed. It's not true that the Indians are still mad at the British, but they seem surprised that people don't know or care about the terrible things that the Raj did. And they are shocked when many modern Britons say that British colonialism was good for India. Indians don't need your money, but it still awaits an apology from Britain for the massacre in Amidst and the numerous atrocities committed during its colonial rule. Countries like Canada, New Zealand, and Australia have issued apologies for similar historical injustices. Can Britain do the same?